Welcome to episode 230 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian who just finished my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Friends, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that hearing from listeners is vitally important. It gives this podcast direction. It gives this podcast purpose. And I learn so much about who is listening and how this podcast can better support those who are tuning in each week. And I was so excited to hear from Heather, who is in China, and she shared with me that she's a huge fan and listener for several years. She goes on to say, "Thank you so much for all you do for us librarians. Your hard work is appreciated around the globe, and I always appreciate how inclusive you are towards your international listeners." And friends, I love the fact that when episodes go live, that listening starts almost immediately, because whether it's happening first thing in the morning or late at night, somebody is tuning into the podcast. And I wanted to also say, yes, we are very mindful that there are listeners all around the world who derive value out of tuning in. And for that reason, I am always making sure that I carry international postage. Connecting with listeners is the best part of being a podcaster. And so just know I am ready to get a sticker into the mail anytime. And especially if you give me the proper formatting, let me know what goes on each line, because I appreciate that depending on where you are in the world, there's a formatting that might be perhaps obvious to you, but not obvious to me. This podcast will always be out and available. The content will be free. I am committed to that, which is why we have ads in each of our episodes to offset the costs of producing a podcast every single week. And most importantly, this is available to anybody who needs it. And I very much value the fact that when people tune in, they find value, they feel comfortable sharing the feedback that they have, and making sure that this continues to be a resource for anyone who needs help in the library. Friends, I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter. My handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, and that can be an international address as well, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And friends, before we get any further, I do want to make sure that I pass along some really exciting news from a friend of mine, Casey Boyd, the Boss Librarian. Casey has announced her second annual Boss Librarian and Friends Back to School Virtual Professional Development. And friends, you're going to want to get these dates on your calendar because it is free. It was free last year, it is free this year, and it is sponsored by every library. Those dates are August 3rd, 4th, and 5th, so save the date. And I want to make sure that if you aren't already following Casey Boyd on social media, that you do so, because that way you can stay tuned to any of the upcoming announcements when it comes to registration and attending a virtual professional development. She offered this last year. It was hugely successful. So if you aren't already, just know you can find Casey Boyd on Instagram and on Twitter, and the address is @boss_librarian. Registration will open for attendees starting on July 10th. Be sure to listen to episode 224. I announced a new sponsorship with Literati Book Fairs. And now a chance to hear from former guest on the podcast and Literati Book Fair veteran, Amanda Chacone. Friends, we are so lucky to have Amanda Chacone back with us on the podcast. Would you give us an idea of where you are in the country and tell us a little bit about the students you work with?
Sure. So I am currently an elementary school librarian at a Title I school in Houston, Texas. We have around 600 students right now in grades 1 through 5.
Outstanding. And you've already hosted 2 Literati Book Fairs. So I'm really curious, when you had those, when you had your parents come in, can you give listeners a little taste of what that evening activity was like in terms of like having the families in? What kinds of things did you have going on in conjunction with your book fair that would also bring the families in and hopefully do some shopping while they're there at the school?
Yeah, so we always tie our book fairs into a community event going on at our school. So one of them that we had was a trunk or treat event where kids got to trick or treat around the school and then come to the book fair. And, when they all, with the parents and the students, enter the book fair with Literati, it's an immediate like, ooh, just like, because it's very elegant looking and it has a bookstore kind of feel to it. And that's exactly what I noticed as they were going around looking at different things. Just like in a bookstore, you kind of browse around here, you browse around there. There's not chaos, which is important. And then there's lots of labels and signs to make it easy to see, this is what I'm looking at, this is where I want to go. So the vibe was actually very calming in a way, which is unique for a book fair, but also engaged because parents were asking their students, hey, what do you think about this book? As students were saying, can you buy this for me, to the parents?
It was very hard standing, at the checkout and feeling like I was the reason why they were having these difficult conversations. But, I like to make sure that when students and families are there, that this is something that they're excited about, and they definitely feel that this is a worthwhile way to indulge their children and support their school at the same time.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love that. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And friends, will make sure to include Amanda's social media contacts in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amanda.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Consider taking advantage of Literati's generous offer. Librarians who book their first Literati Book Fair before July 31st for this upcoming fall and mention the code UNITED will receive a $500 gift card from Titlewave. As always, there's a link in today's show notes. And now a word from our sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. I am grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Missing Books, and my conversation with Fallon Farokhi and Steve Tetreault. Friends, I am so excited. Fallon Farokhi, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's great to be back.
Friends, if you haven't listened to Fallon's first episode, when she was here on the show, this is actually going back a ways, back to November of 2021, which is not that long ago, but it does. It really feels like a long time ago. Episode 150, Culturally Responsive Library. Fallon, I am so grateful you're here to give us sort of an update. Can I ask, have you modified or done anything since you and I last talked in November of 21 in the world of making our spaces more culturally responsive?
Big time, big time. I have actually, since we spoke, I have moved districts and moved schools. And I am now in a kindergarten through sixth grade building where 80% of our students do not have English as their first language or primary language. And so it has been a big eye opener. And I feel like I've been able to be more culturally responsive in my new school. Because the Spanish is the language they mostly speak. And so the students are teaching me so much and have helped develop the space, the collection. We got an awesome grant from our Northeast Kansas Library Systems for purchasing more up-to-date Spanish English books. And so they've helped me decide what books to get and how to, to organize. I mean, it's just been wonderful being in a new space for me. And the librarian who had been there, I spoke with her and visited her before she retired. And she told me, this is one area that you really could help us with. And so I've been so happy to be able to put, a lot of our strategies and things that we had talked about in the podcast really to work for students who need it. And so, just a lot of new things going on this year.
Let's back up and introduce you to those of us who have not met you already. We've heard that you teach elementary, but give us an idea of what your library is like, what your schedule is like, and, what your everyday looks like. I know we're almost all on summer vacation. Sorry, Steve. But Fallon, what does a typical day look like for you?
Yes. Well, I am in Overland Park, which is Kansas City on the Kansas side. And so I get in about 7:45, and then our first class of the day is 8:30, and we have 50-minute classes. And I have several preps a day, which is really nice. And I'm in part of the specials rotation. So with our music, art, and PE teachers, the students see us every 4 days. And so some classes I see twice a week, some classes I see once a week. And we have enough blocks where, if a teacher comes down with a reading group, we do have empty times in the library where they can use space. And then I've often done book talks with them about what books to pick next. And, our library is a hub for all of our school meetings, PTO, student council, STEM club. And so the library just is always a place that people are coming in and out of. Our student council houses their student store in there. And so kids are always like, let's look at the books over here. And I'm like, no, there's no books over there. Get away from the store. But I teach a lot more than at my last school, because my last school I would just see classes once a week, and I had a lot more open time in the library for planning curriculum and projects and long-term things with groups of students. And so that's been a difference.
Well, and I think what's important to remind listeners is our circulation stats. And then, our circulation stats, when you're on a fixed schedule like that and you have classes who are always coming down to check out books, all of a sudden the burden of retrieving those missing books, which is the topic of today's conversation, that's much higher than for those of us, I think, who might be serving larger populations but are on a flexible schedule. Because what I've discovered, especially at the high school, is on a flexible schedule, your circ stats are going to sort of vary wildly based on the teachers' priorities, the teachers who have reading expectations and assignments that fit nicely with the collection that we offer. But for you, with being on a fixed schedule, how many students are you supporting in your building?
Just under 400. With 397, something like that. Yep.
Sure. And they're coming to the library every week.
And sometimes twice.
And that's amazing. And sometimes twice, because you've got that ABCD schedule, right? And so all of a sudden that getting those missing books back, that sort of ups the ante, right?
It really does. And I know the last librarian that was there before, she had a really strict policy about how many books they could check out. If they come in twice that week, the second day, there's no circulation, which that for her was her way of controlling it. And since this was my first year there, I'm all about getting the books into the hands of the students, especially if a student is saying, I want to check this out. I can't come to say no unless, something is really up with their own circulation account. So it was a big change for my teachers too, because I would send down the return cards on those second days and they're like, but they're not checking out today. And I said, well, if they want to, and if they're able to, why not? Like that, we're a library. So that was a change for them.
I think that's an important reminder because all too often when we come into a new space, we're sort of given the expectation, please don't change anything. Don't change anything. This is the way your predecessor did this. And you're like, yeah, you know what? We don't say that to teachers. When a teacher comes in and gets hired, we don't say, hey, the person who was in this space before taught this way. Nobody does that to a teacher. Why should they do that to us? I'm so glad that you're here, Fallon. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks.
Friends, Steve Tetreault is with us, and I got to tell you, Steve Tetreault, if you haven't heard one of his 5 previous episodes, he is a regular contributor to this podcast. This is his 6th appearance. Steve, before we get started, you do something which I think is a fantastic service providing to school librarians everywhere, and that is the School Librarian Learning Network. And for so many of us who are coming up on summer vacation, we got some time on our hands, would you give us an idea of this resource? Because I know even in the summer, we've got lots of learning opportunities, and you warehouse those in a way that really is wonderful for all of us who are trying to stay up on our practice while we're also getting some of that much deserved rest and relaxation.
Yeah, well, so about a year ago, I was looking around. There were all these great online learning opportunities, like right as we were in and coming out of pandemic. And, there's so many places you weren't able to go in person anymore, but there were so many virtual replacements. And so much of it was free. But if you didn't get this one email from this one place, or if you didn't happen to talk to the person who was setting up this other thing, you might miss some of the great stuff that was going on. I was like, it'd be great if there was a place that just was all just visible, that you could just kind of see like, hey, here's the things that are going on. So I just started a website. I threw a calendar on it and I just started plugging in like, here's stuff that I've been getting notices about. Here's what people are telling me about. And the idea was sort of to try and make it that people in lots of different places could come together, because especially as school librarians, I think we tend to be isolated in our buildings, and it can be hard to find PD that is going to work for you because it's you and basically nobody else sometimes in your building. So they're not going to program for you. So I feel like having a place you can go that you can say, here's good resources, here's good potential free things that you can learn from. I thought that seemed to make a lot of sense. It's something that I'm hoping to get more state organizations involved with a little bit, because I know that lots of state organizations offer free learning opportunities for their members. And I think it's really important, especially today and in these current climate, that we get those state organizations kind of working together, talking together, seeing what's going on in their different places and sharing ideas and information. So yeah, it's been a little bit of a passion project for me. And there are some items already programmed out through the summer. I got to do a little more tuning up, but just try to update it whenever I get the chance, and hopefully people can take advantage.
Well, and friends, you can be sure we're going to put contact information in the show notes today. But Steve, let us know where you are on the internet, because anytime a librarian sits down and curates resources for other school librarians, I just put full faith and trust in the work that you do when you have set your mind to a task like putting together PD for school librarians.
Yeah, so that website is schoollibrarianlearningnetwork.org. And there's a couple of other addresses. Most of them will get you there. If you get something along the lines of School Librarian Learning Network, you'll probably end up there. There is the calendar, like I mentioned, but there's also, like you said, there's some resources too. I've been trying to kind of find what are tools, what are websites that might be useful to folks that they might want to check out. So one of the ones that I have got a little podcast section, and one of them, of course, is this podcast, because I have learned so much from the guests on this show. I mean, I remember Fallon's episode and going, oh my God, there's so many things I need to do to try and help my students more. So I love when I get to listen in. And if people aren't up on their latest episodes. There's a link there for those and lots of other links too. So hopefully there's some useful stuff there.
So, friends, if you haven't caught one of Steve's earlier appearances on our show, Steve, would you remind us, where you are in the country and tell us about your library and give us an idea of what your day looks like?
Sure. So I am in New Jersey, and if you dropped a push pin right in the middle of the state, that's about where I work. I'm pretty close to dead center, and I'm in a little bit of a weird situation. I'm in a 712 complex, and our 78 is separated from our 912, but we share some hallways that connect the buildings. And a couple of years ago, they closed the physical library in the middle school, turned it into classrooms. So I share library space with the high school for our middle school. And the problem is the middle school students aren't allowed to go over to the high school by themselves. So I basically am a bridge to bring materials back and forth for them. So when we talk about books being missing, it really becomes a bit of a thing when there's not an easy place for kids to go and return stuff. So it's been an interesting and fun challenge this last 18 months as I've been trying to sort of build up a program where there was none and create spaces and ways for kids to access materials that they haven't had access to for several years.
So, forgive me. So in your situation, you weren't immediately replacing somebody else. You could, in effect, try whatever you liked to see if it worked.
Yes. And I do a lot of throw it and see what happens and then fix it after it breaks, because there's a lot of things that there's stuff that hasn't been in place, so you're starting from scratch anyway. I'm trying to rebuild the culture. I'm trying to rebuild the idea of library services are a thing, because I literally have had a whole generation of students come through our school that haven't had a middle school library at all. So we're, kind of rebuilding, and it's a process, but it's been fun. Remind us, do you have a high school counterpart? Yes. So there is a high school librarian, and we do kind of work on a couple of things together. He mostly takes care of high school stuff, and I mostly take care of middle school stuff, but there's a little bit of crossover. I do a couple of things for the high school here and there, too. I would be curious to know, and we'll get into this in our conversation, if your practices for getting missing books back at all are reflective of the policies that would be something the students would be finding in the high school. So as they move from the middle school program to the high school program, if that continuity is expected, because, when you're in different buildings, it's not expected. But if you're in the same building, I could see this being an opportunity. Let's call it an opportunity. Yeah. So that's the key word. That's right. Yes, it's not a challenge. It's an opportunity. I had an administrator who I think was committed to never saying the word challenge and replaced it with opportunity. And it really did put a different spin on it. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about solving problems. So, friends, this episode is an opportunity to revisit a topic I first tackled way back in season 1. Episode 26, Book Bounty Hunter, the worst job ever. And friends, if you can appreciate, season 1 was me, a solo effort by myself. I had never really recorded anything remotely. I had only just sat in front of my laptop and recorded myself. And I'll be honest, I knew I wanted this episode. This was on the list I had created back in 2018, but in sort of in the dark, cold days of winter in February of 2018. I came up with a list of about 35 different topics. This was one of them, because And like so many aspects of our job, it's not like I could go to the classroom teachers and talk to them about it. And obviously they have their classroom libraries, but they also see their students every day in many respects. That those classroom teachers, regardless of the age level, regardless of the grade they support, they see their students every day. We don't have that. So our strategies were going to be different anyway. So, we tackled this episode 5 years ago, and friends, that's fair game. If any listeners happen to go back to season 1 and season 2 especially and say, you know what, we could take another stab at that was 5 years ago. I think it's time. Especially excited because not only do we get to update this episode, but we've got 2 amazing guests to join us.
all three of us have just recently been wrapping up our school year. I'd like to start off with a question which is super obvious, but describe for us your efforts to recover missing books and how that changes in the last month of the school year. Because regardless if you are ending your school year as we are here in the United States right now, or if you're ending your school year in December, like some of our friends in Australia and New Zealand and so forth, you know, we all wrap up that school year for an extended break. What does that look like when you're missing books? So, Fallon, would you give us a start? Give us an idea. What has this last month been like for you?
Oh, boy. Well, the students do not like the last month because they have to wrap up their reading as fast as of print books. I mean, our ebooks they can access, but they really like the printed books. And so I tell them, you know, our circulation is coming to a close and we need to gather all the books back, and we do a visual of books that we are missing. And I show them the covers on this big screen on our big TVs. Have you seen these books anywhere? And then sometimes, you know, because I make mistakes or we have subs that are checking books in, or students that are helping, and they miss scanning something. And so some students will say, that is on the shelf. I have seen that. And they will go and they will find, if they find it, we celebrate, high fives all around. I give prizes out. So we make it seem like, you know, this is a concerted effort on all of our parts, because I always tell them this is our library. These are our books. And, you know, I'll say, you know, students, we have, depending on the age, 6th graders are a little different, but the younger kids, I'll say, you know, so many of you want to check this, you know, brand new book out, and I'll show them the cover. And I'll say, I have a list of 10 of you that want to check it out, but we can't find it anywhere. And so then the kids say, oh, I think I saw it in our class library, or, you know, so-and-so had it in his cubby. And so we start like, can you help me with this? Let's play detective. And that's very different than throughout the year. Throughout the year, you know, we don't really call books lost unless a student comes or a parent says, we really have lost this book. And so we don't do the big visual, but, you know, I do make it seem like this is something you can all help with. I'm one person. I don't have an assistant anymore, and I don't have any parent volunteers. And so I really put this on them, and that we're all trying to be responsible together. And some of them look at it like a game. Like, let's see how many we can find. And I'll give them, you know, a cart of books I haven't shelved yet. And I'll say, you know, how about you guys go through this cart and tell me, do you see any of these? Or we have tubs of paperbacks that we let students check out who have overdue books. And so, you know, sometimes a hardback will find its way in there. And so that's a different way of approaching it at the end of the year.
I love that we do recruit the extra eyes, you know, and kids of a certain age just want to help, and they are so task oriented, and they have that strong moral compass, and sometimes they keep that strong moral compass, and sometimes it just disappears altogether. But, you know, recruiting them as your extra eyes, I love that strategy. How about you, Steve? You deal with middle school students, and this might require a different approach, especially because you haven't in the past had a robust reading culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was sort of the first year that we kind of had that I was working as a school librarian, that we had stuff that was kind of out and in circulation, that we had a pretty good amount out there. So I started a couple of weeks back with Christina Holtzweiss had actually shared out a template of a countdown to when books have to be back. So I absolutely stole that and I slapped that onto our catalog. So when they went into the catalog, it was literally the first thing they saw when they went into it. And that was kind of going as a reminder. I had reminders in the morning bulletin or in the daily bulletin to say, hey, don't forget, this is when we're closing things down. I closed out our circulation at the end of May because we're wrapping up in just a couple of days, but the last couple of weeks of school are always just insane. And I know that just trying to get the kids focused, even just in the classroom, is a nearly impossible task. So I didn't want to have to add on top of that, like go and look through all the stuff you just threw in a trash bag and brought home from your locker and tear through it until you find the book that's missing. So I figured I was going to be a little proactive. I tried to, kind of step things up that way. And, I mostly followed a lot of the same things I usually do in wrapping things up. It was a little unusual this year because I had a teacher who wanted to do buddy reads for her final independent reading group with her ELA students. So there were 3 classes of 7th graders who she asked me to bring down. Like I brought down a big cart of books that we had multiple copies of, and I had probably 30 books that got checked out in the last, right before I said no more checkouts. And I was like, okay, that was bad planning on my part, but it's okay. And so I had to go in and set all the due dates to be a little bit later. And it ended up working out really well, actually. I ended up with just bringing a cart down to her room for the day that she was expecting them all back. And everything was either back that day or the next day. She was able to put it on the cart, and I just had to bring the cart and take care of it. So it worked out.
And I think in that particular circumstance, as hard as it is to be like, no, wait, but I'm sure the teacher appreciated you extending this opportunity to her students. And then you are now in their good graces. I mean, this is a campaign of kindness. We are always in this place where we're trying to win over converts and people to realize the value that we bring to the classroom. And here you were. Am I correct? You went to the classroom with all of this? I mean, okay. And that's a very powerful thing. When the librarian leaves the library and goes they almost think like there's a force field, like you're not supposed to leave. Like, what are you doing here? You're like, I can leave.
That's one of the benefits of not having a physical library, is that they expect to see me around. Like I am a presence in the halls. I go to classrooms, but I love when I get to do, if they invite me in for book talks, or in this case for buddy books, I grab a cart full of books. I get as many books on it as I can, and I bring it down to say, here's stuff that can circulate. And like Fallon was saying before, even though we were coming up at the end of the school year, I didn't want to shut off access to books because we're the library. I want kids taking out books as much as possible. So it happened to work out really well. So I'm kind of rethinking maybe for next year, borrowing a little bit more.
Well, and a couple things that I heard, I mean, regardless of the age of our students, there has to be some sort of advance warning, some sort of heads up. By the way, just so you can't come out of the blue and just tell them one day we're done checking out. No, they do. They need to be given plenty of, and maybe a communication to your teaching staff, especially if this is a procedure that may not have always been in place prior to you coming on the scene. I love taking a cart out of the library and going down where the kids are during locker cleanout. That's huge. Locker cleanout to me is a great opportunity, if you can, to just be in there amongst the throng. And as the kids are cleaning out their materials and the food that's in their lockers is just terrible. But invariably and if if you're there, if they see you, they're like, oh, you're here. And, you start collecting those books. It's fantastic. And, recruiting them to help us in this endeavor is absolutely huge. I love this idea that Fallon has of showing images of the books that you're missing, because that oftentimes for the students, they look at it and then they go, oh, you make that connection. I will say for a couple classes where I was missing quite a few books, I would sometimes do the dollar figure. I would do the math. And I would sometimes, at one point I got sort of frustrated because these were older kids, 4th and 5th graders. I gave them calculators and let's figure out. I said, we're going to add, and they just had some calculators, some of those big button calculators. And I'm like, let's do some math. Let's see how much is missing from the library. And at one point it was over $500 worth of books for one class. It was like, okay, so what do you think needs to happen here, friends? And I sort of sometimes wave over to the magical tree of money that's growing in the middle of the library. I said, well, that's okay because I just grow money and I'll just pick it off the tree. And they're like, there's no tree there, Mrs. Herman. I said, I know. There's no money there either. So there is no money tree. You need to bring these books back. Absolutely. What has contributed most to the reason why library books go missing? In other words, why are students coming to the library without their library books, or the books are not making it back to the library on time? So, Steve, let me ask you, is there something sort of systemic or something that makes it just that much more challenging for kids to remember their library books?
I think there are some kids who, so in our school, we've got independent reading. All the kids are expected to have an independent reading book. They should theoretically have a new book each month. And there's some kids who have that new book every month, and a lot of them take them out from the library. That's great. But there's kids who take them out because they were told they have to have an independent reading book, and then it goes in a bag or it goes home, and then it's out of sight, out of mind, totally forgot that they have it. There have definitely been kids I've gone to see after a couple of weeks to say like, hey, this book that you borrowed. Oh, I borrowed that? Yeah, you did. So I think that kind of plays into it in my situation. And again, the fact that I don't have a physical space that they like walk by and necessarily see like, hey, here's where all the books live, so let's make sure we get the books back there, makes it a little trickier. I do have a little bit of a space that's got a book return that hopefully they use, but even as late as April, I was reminding kids where the book return was, and they were going, oh, that's what that is. So I was like, okay, so we got to work on our marketing a little bit, but we're getting there.
How about you, Fallon? Is there something that, and I can identify with your schedule for one right away. And I was like, oh, I already know what your day is like. So tell us, is there something about your school that, and the way library is configured that makes it especially challenging for kids to remember their library books?
Well, I think part of it is that a lot of our students, they are used to only being able to check out one at a time. Years passed. And so when I came in and I said, well, you can have several, because I don't only read one, like we talk about our reading lives and all of that. And so I think my policy has made it so that, sometimes they check out one and they have checkout for 2 weeks. So their due date is not always the next library date, because especially if you're older, you're reading a longer chapter book, like I even need time, or I just really want to take my time, and they can renew them. And so with the younger students, it's a lot easier. We get a lot of less missing books with the younger grades, because they know, well, every time I come to library, I need to bring the books back. And the teachers make that a part of their routine. And they send, tell the students, hey, tomorrow's library day, put your books in the tub, and they have a special place for it. And so at all of my schools where I've been a librarian, the primary students were not the ones that had the most missing books. And it's the older students. But I think the biggest one with our students, kind of like Steve was saying, is they have a requirement to always have a book. And I tell them, I say, well, take several, because if you don't like the book you're reading, we'll have a nonfiction book that you want to look at, or a National Geographic like joke, or, those, just to have something different, that you don't have to be reading this long chapter book. Because that's the thing is with a lot of our students, when I came in, they said, well, I don't like to read. And I was like, oh no, let me show you.
Sounds like an opportunity.
Yes. Yes.
Sounds like an opportunity.
It really is. It really is. And so I think for them, I'm a bit of a book pusher. I'm like, well, if you're not wanting to read what you're reading, let's give you some options. And so then they get confused about, well, when's the due date? And even though they can log into their accounts on their iPads, they still, we're just learning responsibility and organization with those upper grade kids. And so I'm trying to help them have a place. And, we have some students in every class that are so responsible. And I always ask them, I'm like, how do you keep track of your books? Because if I tell them, they don't listen. But if a friend is like, well, I just, I put him here every time. And I know, and because our kids don't have lockers, they have desks and they have cubbies. And so if they go home, it's different. Usually the books that go home are the ones that go missing.
So much of this reminds me of what it was like to be an elementary librarian, because I did that for 14 years. Couple things. For us, having an ABCD rotation was ridiculous because kids came in, they're like, I thought it was gym today. I didn't bring my books because I thought it was art. And that creates something that really does sort of complicate things. And you're right, having that communication with the teachers, a lot of times when teachers recognize that all it takes is that reminder home. I say, hey, everybody, tomorrow is B day, and that means library for this class. So don't forget to put those books in your backpacks. So I totally agree. Have you ever, so it sounds like you might, Fallon, have you ever encountered teachers for whom the library books stay at school?
Only on a student-to-student basis, if a parent requests that because their child keeps losing the books or they get damaged repeatedly. And I hate to do that because I want to make sure that all the students have something at home that they could at least show their family, or if the family doesn't necessarily want to read with them, I always say, well, you read to your dog, or you read to your stuffed animal, anybody. And so I really hesitate to say the books stay at school.
Well, and I'll be honest, I worked in schools where that was a teacher initiative. The teachers said, you know what? Here's our milk crate. Everybody put your library book in the milk crate. And when it's story time, we go to the milk crate and we go get the books that you guys picked out from the library. And on the one hand, I totally see where that is selling us short because these books aren't making it home. But the teacher had also been in the building for 20 years, and I had been in there for 5 minutes. And that's where you sort of have to let the teacher who has, at this point, worked with the families, and again, in the building for 20 years, I had been there for 5 minutes. And they said, trust me, Amy, the books are going to go into the milk crate. And sure she said, it was like, when it was library day, guess what? Every kid got a new book because every kid had their library books. And on the one hand, it solved a couple big problems. But again, you have to sort of trust your teachers. And sometimes it sort of counters what we want to be those book advocates, but we also have to appreciate they might know the family situation a little bit better than we do. And there is no perfect solution. Because I love this idea of the kids having the books and having them at home and having them as long as they need them to read them. But on the other hand, have you ever gotten an angry parent email or an angry parent phone call? Why are you sending a book home with my kids? They always lose their books.
Definitely.
Not yet.
Oh, you're so lucky, Steve.
It's really awkward. I've got a kid who's missing 2 books. That's okay. It's library. Go check out another book. The parents are like, what are you doing? No. Do not send my kid home with another book. We still can't find the 2 they're missing. And it's like, all right.
Well, one thing that our school does, because that's one issue that I had was saying no when a student has a book. Even if they forgot it at home, I still want them to leave the library with something. And in our school, we're the Buffaloes. And so we have a Buffalo library, which is a cart out in front of the main entry doors. And so it's full of books that we've purchased with our Title I fund. So they're not library books, they're not classroom books, but they say there's a sticker on them that says, this is part of the Buffalo Library, mobile library. And so every time students don't have aren't able to check out necessarily, I do send them there and they say, we can take these home. And, we do ask for them back, but there's no way to track it. And so we get a ton of those back to our library, which, they don't have barcodes. And so I always have a basket of those where I send them back to the cart because I don't have anywhere, they don't belong to me. But that's been our school's way around it, of still being able to send books home. And if they don't make it back, it's okay. And that's also a place where I put a lot of donated books that aren't, up to snuff quality wise for our amount of circulation. But families want to donate to us. So then I'll say, well, we're going to put them in the mobile library, and they appreciate that at least it'll get in hands, or we'll put them, in a basket in the nurse's office or a basket in the front office when the kids are waiting for rides. And so it's just because I agree, I hate not sending books home, but the ones where, at least the parents aren't worried about being fined and all of that. At least they have something to take home.
It's a very elegant solution because you're taking care of quite a few things at the same time. And it sort of leads us to this idea, friends, that all of us have to have some sort of policy when students do not come back to school with their books. When the kids come to school and their books are not with them, we have to have some sort of plan in place. How do we support our students and not let them feel like they are being punished? We never want them to feel singled out. We don't want them to feel like everyone's looking at them like, oh, there's the kid who didn't bring their books back. And as I'm telling you right now, the first time they start crying in your library, you will not forget. You're like, nope, we've got to have a plan in place because this is not cool. The optics of having some child crying at the table because they can't check out is just heart-wrenching. So I love that you have a place where the students can go. It is a free-for-all. It's a free-for-all. The kids can take the books. I imagine there's something on the inside. Is there any sort of message that says, keep this book if you'd like it, or send it back to school if you'd like it? But the parents will be able to tell. It doesn't have a barcode. It doesn't have any sort of indicators that it belongs on the library shelves.
Right. And our librarian before me, I noticed she had just tubs and tubs of paperback books. And I wondered, because I was always told, and trained in library school, library bound is the way to go. And paperbacks are really better for classroom circulation. And so I had asked her, I said, what is all of this? And she said, well, I put those at tables, while we're waiting to go check out, and she had so many great strategies to use with them. She said, I use those for when we learn about, the author, illustrator, book cover, copy, just text features. So she's like, I use them for a lot of things, but also if a student didn't bring their library books back, well, I let them check a book out from the paperbacks because I'm not going to charge them for it. If they lose them, it's like $3. It's not enough of a
investment.
Yes, there we go. Or a lot of them are just donated. And so she said, oh, because I said, are you getting rid of these? No, don't get rid of those. Those are really a big part of our program. And, after 13 years of being in as a librarian, I was like, this is my first time learning this. So yes, we shall keep it. And so that's usually where the students are sent if they don't have their books back. I'll say, well, at least go look and see if there's anything in there you like. And I don't make them, but I say, well, you have this opportunity to still check out. And they appreciate that at least.
How about you, Steve? Do you have some sort of policy in place when students are looking to check out books, but they also have books out already?
So our system is set up that it will automatically limit kids to 3 checkouts at a time. And I can override that if there's a kid that needs, I know they need a bunch of stuff. But so if they've got stuff out, I always encourage them to continue to take stuff out until they hit that limit. And then when they hit that limit, okay, now we've got to start working on, we got to get stuff back. And we don't do fines in my library, but until it goes lost, I am open to, I'll give them some reminders. I'll harass them a little bit, but once the book comes back, they're free to take out whatever they want to take out. So it's, we're kind of a work in progress, but we're getting there. And part of that too, I think part of the going missing part of it is that I noticed this year that our students are reading slower than I thought they would. And so we started out with a 2-week loan policy. And literally every kid was like, I need to renew this. So I said, okay, we got to change this. So I moved it out to 3 weeks. And that seemed to get a lot of them over that hump. But then you're going up against the other side of that, which is now you've had this book for 21 days and it's become such a part of your life, you forget you have it. So it's it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But, so far it's been mostly working out pretty well.
Well, and I do try to make the distinction between books that students are checking out for an assignment versus books that they are checking out I don't like to make the distinction. I don't like to call them for fun books, but free choice books. I mean, you don't want to call them fun books because that implies the books they're reading for school aren't fun. Let's start to run through some things that we can do as school librarians to prevent missing books from becoming permanently lost. And because I think that there are things we can do on our end to support our students and their families and the teachers who are working with these kids day in, day out. So, Steve, what are some things that have worked for you?
So I actually stole from you because I remember you at one point talking about how you had started putting the address label for your school into the books. And I was like, that is brilliant, because you had said that they would get mailed back to you sometimes. Literally, I started doing that about a week after I heard you say it. And about 2 weeks after that, I got a book back in the mail. So I was like, this is clearly the way to go. So, so I had gotten one of those self-inking stamps with the school address on it. Please return to. And I've been trying to get that into the fronts of books. And also, we get our books. I get pretty much all of our books from Mackin, and you can have them put for an extra 10 cents. They'll put a clear property of label in there with the address on it. So I spend the extra 10 cents. That way they're already done. So I'm still working my way through the old stuff that we already had and trying to stamp everything. But those have been sort of a couple of loss prevention measures that seem to really be paying off really well so far.
That to me is just so I make the Avery 5160s and I just run them through the machine. I put one in the front, one in the back. And I really have, every time something shows up that's been mailed to us from across the country or from, we were on vacation, or I received something from Children's Hospital because the kids took the library books to the hospital. I was like, oh my gosh. But yes, the address labels are absolutely huge. How about you, Fallon? What are some things that you have done that have really worked in terms of getting these books back?
Yes. Well, this was also an idea I have stolen from the librarians in my new district where I'm at. And I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner, but I would always stamp, the front, the title page underneath the publishing company. But then all of our librarians in our district, they will also stamp where the pages are up here and here and here, because they're like, whenever your books are in a stack, you can immediately see like, oh, that's a Comanche book. Like that's a library. I better pull that out. And I had never even seen that before. And that just has helped so much, because I'll even show our students. I'll say, look, so if you're looking for your books, be sure to look at where the pages are. And so that you can see if there's a stamp for our school. And they'll be like, that's great. And then they start looking for it too. And so that was new for me this year. And I feel really silly it's so simple. But, I even know now when I bring books home from my own library or interlibrary loan from other schools to look for that, because, I have lots of book piles around me. And if I forget, like, oh, where did I get that from? I'll just swoosh the pile around and I'll be like, oh, that one goes to this school, or this, I got to return that. Because I even tell them, like, I misplace books too. And these are ways that we can help identify what is a home book and what's a come back to the library.
That's definitely a benefit of the stamp, is that you can put it on that edge. And like you said, all three sides of the pages just makes it so simple.
Well, and I will say the only downside to that is when you discard the book.
Because you have to block it out.
Yes. So I think the solution is to make these books glaringly obvious that they are library books. I will say we just also, coincidentally, at the end of the school year, you also have yearbook distribution. And when you're in a high school, those yearbooks are massive, but they also all look the same. And I did this to my own yearbook when I think I was in high school, because I remember taking a permanent marker and writing my name on on the pages going around the perimeter of the book, because the idea that we are all, you hand out how many of these, 1,600 of them, and guess what? They all look the same. By the same token, I also, I've always been an advocate of putting the barcode on the front of the book. And I know that this is a hill I'm going to have to die on, because there are some people for whom that is, the cover of the book is sacrosanct. You cannot mar the cover. They put the barcode placement, friends. That's an episode. That's its whole episode unto itself. But
that's not even an episode. That's a battle royale. You just gotta fight it out.
It is, again, maybe that's another episode. But making, labeling your books in such a way that there is no question whatsoever that this is a library book is absolutely huge. Remember also something that I oftentimes celebrated with my students there was talking about a book that had been lost and it was returned, and imparting on the students this expectation that this is a collective effort, that when you see a library book, return it to the library. We had the ones that, especially with the kids who took the library books out onto the playground. And as adorable as that is, taking your library books out onto the playground, taking your library books into the lunchroom. Okay, yes, that's adorable. But every librarian's like, oh, wait, no, that's a terrible idea. Okay, yes, it's take a picture. But oh my goodness, now I'm just worried for a whole nother reason, because the people who would get those books back to me were the custodians, because they were out mowing the lawns. They're like, hey, Amy, I found this book over by the swing sets before the rain started, and having that, putting that out there and saying to the students, when you take your books out onto the playground, you have to bring them back. When you take your library books to the lunchroom, you have to recognize this is a terrible idea. It's like, especially on French Toast Day, let's not.
Well, we also have our after school club or after school care club. And so they will always say, can you tell me whose these are? And so I have a really good relationship with those teachers, because they know, they can recognize that this was left behind. We don't know whose this is. And so that's been nice that at least they know that it's a library book. And
we're still building that up in my school, because literally the third week of school, I had just gotten a shipment of books and a kid requested one of the brand new books. And I said, absolutely, here you go. I love getting new books in kids' hands. And 2 days later, the secretaries called me down to the office. They said, is this one of yours? And it had been left outside. And that was the first day it had rained. And it was brand new book, just completely... it was heartbreaking. And the kid felt so bad. She hadn't realized it had fallen out of her bag on the way to the bus, and nobody had seen it or picked it up. And then, yeah.
Mail carriers and bus drivers alike have returned books. And I just check your mailbox every morning, because you never know what you're going to find. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Have you ever used those sort of wanted posters? I've seen them on libraries or social media. You've got these wanted posters and you put the cover of the book on, and the hope is that kids are going to be like, I've seen that book. And you're like, okay, but it can't be somebody's personal copy. It has to be, because sometimes they do that.
The library
They're like, here it is. And you're like, no, it's a library copy.
Yes. Yeah. My old library assistant at my last school, she had been the assistant there for over 7 years. And so when I came there, she said, well, this is just something I do at the end of the year. Are you okay if I keep? And I was like, yes, I have never seen this before either. Yes, please do it. And the kids, they kind of knew to look for those signs. They're like, oh, these are the missing books. And so that's how I kind of, carried that over to my new school. Not that I would print them, but I would show them just digitally, hey, these are what's missing. So I think it's a great idea, because we're all so visual.
Well, and I've never wanted to make this punitive, but I've always celebrated when classes have gotten 100% book return. Yes. And so I did for many years. I had a template that I would print up of when a classroom, especially at the elementary level, had 100% book return, because I would bring it down there. I'd put it outside their door and, just stick my head in and say, hey, you guys, awesome job getting 100%. When I had Scholastic Book Fair dollars, I actually rewarded the first 3 teachers to get 100% book return. And I know you shouldn't be like, I know bribery should not be the method but you know what? If I'm going to host book fairs and I have Scholastic Book Fair dollars, and I did this for years, I just offered $15 extra to any librarian who the first three got $15 in the next book fair, a credit towards their purchases. And it turned out results. I mean, it was kind of fun. But yeah, the certificates are sort of fun. But, you know, making this a celebratory, not punitive, but hey, you guys got 100%, or putting those on the announcements too. I mean, if your principal is up for that, making that part of your announcements. Congratulations to the following classes for getting 100% book return before the end of the school year. I remember doing that. That was so much fun. You could sort of hear the cheering down the hall.
We did that this year with our last bulletin board for the school year for the library. And so I put all the classes up. I had sticky notes of just the numbers. And I said, let's see who can get close to zero. We did not get to zero, but I said, let's see the classes that get closest to zero. And, you know, about every few days, I would update the numbers. And I mean, everyone has to pass by the bulletin board on their way to specials and the cafeteria. So I could always hear them out there going, oh, and then congratulating each other's classes. Like, hey, you guys are, you know, you came down from somewhere in the 70s and now you just owe like 30. Like, that's great. So, you know, getting them to do some math, and like, it's a collective effort, like you said. And one more thing, Amy, you were saying about how we should make it be more celebratory and not punitive. And with those new books, Steve, that you're saying, I always have students that will check out that new book and then hold on to it for dear life and say, well, I need to renew it. And I'll say, well, you know, we have all these students that are on hold for that book and we just got it. You know, how would you feel if you really wanted to read this book and someone just kept it for weeks because they loved it so much? And so you have to tell them that if it's a high demand, and usually that encourages them to bring it back. Because I'll say, you were the first checkout and you've had it for a month now. Is that fair? Because they're all about fairness.
And sometimes it's
at elementary school.
It's the kids sitting next to them. They're like, oh, I want that book. And you're like, well, I guess we better move it along, you know?
Yes.
But I think those conversations, I don't know that the kids always are approached in that way to sort of make those, to be aware of the fact that they're using something that other people want to use. And I think it's great when they have the opportunity to have that conversation, because like I couldn't keep Project Hail Mary on the shelf this year. Like every time it was, and kids would borrow it and then renew it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know that there's a like 5 deep waiting list for this. If you're not reading it, can I get it back? And they would go, oh, okay, I'll finish it up this weekend. And like that, it really makes a difference for a lot of kids.
Well, and for us, because when I was teaching elementary, we were on an ABCD schedule. You know, you'd kind of look where that bookmark was, and if the bookmark hadn't moved, you're like, dude, what are we doing? I mean, and in a couple of cases, the kids are like, well, you're going to make me check out a book, so here it is. We're like, okay, how about we not go pretend that you're reading this book, and let's find something you actually want to read, because, by the way, there are other kids who would like to read this. You know, Fallon, I'm aware that some librarians at the beginning of the year will send a letter home outlining their policies regarding damaged and lost books. Have you ever done this where you communicate with the families at the beginning of the year what the library expectations are?
Yes. And so we have a school newsletter that goes out every week. And at this new school, and then my old school, we had a monthly newsletter. And so I would always use that beginning of the year one. At this new school I'm at, we have to have everything in English and Spanish. And so we have a translator in our front office. And so she's like this last year, she said, well, you know, do you want to change anything? And this was my first time there. And so I said, well, let's just keep things as they are. And then if we need to adjust, we will for next year. So I just kind of kept things how they were and learned. And so I think this next year I'm going to change it up a little bit, but also put it in our weekly reminder and newsletter that goes out, because a lot of the parents read those and they just rely on them for information. So it doesn't hurt.
I love that idea of being proactive about it. It literally never occurred to me. And now I have just written that down as something to add to my list because that's brilliant. Usually it's after the fact, but being upfront about it probably solves so many headaches, I'm sure.
Well, and a lot of them say, like, I didn't see that, or I did. And I say, it's okay. You know, we don't accept, there's so many policies. And I think that helps a lot, is that we say, well, the information is here. Your child can also tell you. I put a lot of it on the child. Like, it's not just you. I mean, unless they're little, they're a kindergarten. I don't expect them to know our policies. But especially with the big kids, if the parents apologize, I'm like, thank you. But also I see your child at least once, maybe twice a week. And so we need to start putting this on them.
Years ago, I was part of a specials rotation, and we had a specials newsletter. And this actually came out, I don't know if it was quarterly or I know it was monthly. It was a monthly specials newsletter, and I was in charge of it. And because my predecessor had been in charge of it. And if you can imagine a, typical just sort of, a one pager, just a one pager. And for us, it was, we had, actually 5 rotations. So we had library, and we had Spanish, and we had art, gym, and music. And each of us got the equivalent of probably what would be about 4 sentences across in just a one pager, a specials rotation. And so that was an opportunity for me to send along just a little blurb each month of what we were doing, and provide those reminders, especially as you were coming up on the end of the school year and saying, oh, and by the way, and for us, it was Memorial Day weekend was usually our cutoff. We stopped checking out books on Memorial Day because after that, it was sort of we're into the home stretch, so to speak. But boy, that created a whole new problem, because now you have the students for 45 minutes and you don't have book checkout. And that was another episode I recorded called 45 Minutes Feels Like Forever, because you are not checking out books. And it was probably the hardest I'd worked most of the school year, because you couldn't check out books. And so you really wanted to limit that as much as you did. So let's talk about overdue notices. And here's another place you can die on this hill. This is fraught with peril here. But Steve, can you give us an idea? I know that you're relatively new to the position, but what have you found works best when it comes to overdue notices? Because we all use systems that will automate this and try and sort of simplify this. So can you give us an idea of what the overdue notices, if you have them, what do those look like, and what kind of frequency do you issue them?
So one of the things I love about our catalog system, we use Accessit, and I have sung its praises before, but I'm going to a little more now, because one of the features I love is that it has underdue notices. So it will send out 3 days, or when you can set the period, but I've got it set so that 3 days before the book is due, it sends an email to the kid saying, hey, just a heads up, this book is going to be due soon, and if you want to renew it, here's the instructions. And it's all automated, goes out first thing in the morning, 3 days before their books are due. So they're getting the upfront of, okay, I should think about what I need to do about this. And then it's got 3 overdue notices. So after 3 days after it's due, they get the first one. And it's a friendly hey, I printed them out here because I've got so many different ones. The underdue is, it's almost time to return your books to the library. And then the first overdue is actually, it's time to bring library books back. I don't think it even says the words overdue in here anywhere in the message, because I'm trying to kind of be, hey, this happens. We just got to make sure we're aware. And again, it's got instructions for if you want to renew it, here's how you do that. And then the second notice, we got a little more, that one's overdue. And hey, this book is overdue. It should be returned. If I haven't seen it, I'm going to have to assume that it got lost. And then the third one is, this is another notice, and I'm assuming at this point that since I haven't seen it and you haven't responded, that it's lost in the ether. So I'll contact whoever I need to contact, parents, about, what we're going to do for replacements. And so it's graduated, and there's about a week in between each one of those overdues going out. So they've got plenty of time to sort of get themselves together. And usually before I even get to the third notice, or definitely by the time we get to the third notice, I will print out. I do book bounty hunting. Like when I heard you say that phrase, whenever that was so long ago, that is what is stuck in my head as the thing I do, because I print out a list of these are the kids that are overdue with these books. I look up their schedules. I go find them. I pull them aside. I say, hey, here's what you got overdue. And I try not to make a huge production out of it, but the kids know, like, because either I'm delivering books or I'm delivering overdue notices. So when they see me coming, they do a quick look at my hands. Does he have books? Oh no, he's only got pieces of paper. So they get the look on their face like, oh man. So they know, like, they've gotten used to seeing me now at this point, and they know what's coming their way. And usually if I pull them aside, I say, look, here's what you've got. It's overdue. It's not a big deal, but you got to bring it back. And they're like, oh, okay. And I would say 8 times out of 10, they have it the next day, it's back, or they've renewed it, which is, fine too. And it's only every once in a while that I have to kind of have a repeat conversation.
Or they turn around and go, oh, you mean this book? And you're like,
oh,
yes.
Absolutely. Yes. All the time. They'll say, oh, that's in my bag. I'll say, great, grab it. Or, oh, it's in my locker. Great, go get it right now. I'll take it. So yeah, it's a lot of face-to-face for the ones that tend to go way overdue. But a lot of it's automated, so I don't worry too much about it, and they're mostly pretty good at getting stuff back. But I definitely have had to sort of adjust the wording. It started out, the ones that come in the system are very kind of plain and generic and didn't really have any tone to them. And my first attempt was maybe a little too, like, I come from a high school background originally, and I've been in middle school for forever, but in my head, I'm always in high school. So I come at it from maybe a little more of the stick side than the carrot side. And I got a couple of responses back like, whoa, you got to be like this. And I was like, well, you know what? Maybe we can dial that back a little bit. And I also have found that the kids will respond without like thinking about why they got that email, because they would write back like, I already turned this in. I turned it in 10 minutes ago. Why am I getting this? And so I had to add a part at the top of all the automated messages that say, this is an automated message that's sent out before school. If you've already put your book in the thing when you see this, that's fine. It's no big deal. That's the very first thing that they see in the whole message, because there were kids that were just writing back like, I already returned. I don't know why you've got to be such a jerk about this. I'm like, I'm not being a jerk. I'm just asking you to turn the book that you borrowed. So we kind of all we came to an agreement. We kind of understand each other now. But yeah, so that's sort of been my general not policy, but my general practice of getting the messages out. And I know I'm talking a lot, and I apologize for that. But there's one other thing that I just started doing that I want to kind of toss out there, which is when the messages on paper weren't working, because I would see kids take them and jam them in a bag, and now they're just garbage at the bottom of the bag. So I was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do about that? And there was a kid who I went to and I said, hey, can you like remind you, what's a way you were going to remember this? And they said, well, I can write on my hand. I was like, I'm okay with that, but I know that other people don't like that. And so I'm not going to write on a kid's hand. Like I thought about it for a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I thought about it, but then I was like, no. So I said, okay, I don't love writing on your hand, but what is something that a kid would like, they would see, like, if I don't write it on my hand, I forget. So that's my go-to. So what is the equivalent of that? And I said, I always look at my watch, and I can't go to bed at night without at least adjusting or taking off or wash my hands. Like, I'm going to see it. So what if I got like bands? And so I went online and I found a cheap online service that makes customized wristbands, silicone. You can put whatever message you want on them. They make them in all colors. They even make glow-in-the-dark ones. So I found a place that did, our school colors are blue. So I found a glow-in-the-dark one that's blue when it's not glowing. And I got the message, remember your library books. And on the other side, so that's one side. The other side is the school name. So it's like, put this on. Now it's on your wrist. You're not going to forget it. So that has been, I'm going to say I've had about a 75% success rate with that. The kids that get them, I haven't had a ton, but the kids that have them usually bring the book back and remember to put the bracelet also into the book drop. The ones that haven't, they've also got a book and a bracelet now. So it's still a work in progress. We're still getting there, but
I love that idea. See, as soon as I wrote it down, like I love it.
They were so cheap. It was like for $50, I got 100 of them. You can't beat it. And
also, when I think of our reminders that we send for, if we have an eat and earn at a restaurant or something is going on, like book fairs coming up, we always send the kids with like a little sticker at home that says like, ask me about or eat and earn tonight. Or, the kids have something on them, at least the younger ones do. And I was like, why doesn't that work for everybody? And our kids, my bigger students anyways, when I give them a sticker or something, they love to stick it on their face. And so I'm like, what about a lost sticker? Like, even if it's just what is it? Like those stickers that are just like books or like a book. I mean, I have so many, but just as a reminder, like, hey, you need to bring something back for me.
Yeah, I love that idea.
When I was working elementary, our students, we were not able to email our students. And that makes sense for many people. Our elementary age kids did not have emails. And I realize as they get older and older, they do. But many of my teachers, because they didn't like the hassle of getting to library day and kids realizing they didn't bring their books, that the day before, when the kids are opening their agendas, because a lot of schools use agendas where the students are writing down what their agenda is, and the families know, hey, open your agenda so I can see what messages your teacher has sent home. The teacher will make as one of their agenda items that the kids are writing in their agenda book, library tomorrow. Bring book tomorrow. And it's that accountability piece, but it's also the teachers being fed up with the drama of what happens when kids don't bring their library books. And how many of you have ever gotten an email or a message from the main office that says, hey, you've got library books down here in the office? Because families will come after the fact and bring the books to the office. I really love so many of these great ideas. A couple things I want to say about the notices that I have learned right away is, first of all, be very leery of including a dollar amount on your overdue notice, because you absolutely do not put a dollar amount, because, and it doesn't matter how educated the recipient is. It doesn't matter how many college degrees those parents have between the two of them. They will miss the part that says this book is overdue. Please return it to the library. They will see that dollar amount and then the email. They have not read the notice at all. They've simply said, I'm being billed for a book that's in my kid's bedroom right now. How dare you? And I'll say, you know what? It's if you read the message, it just says, please return the book. I've learned not to include the replacement value of the book, because rather than incentivizing or motivating parents, it puts them in this automatic response mode where they become hyper defensive. And another thing that has become an issue when you do, and I realize this is another sticky situation of sending, especially when you get to older students, and emailing those notices, because it's a violation of across the board. It's a violation of student privacy. But with our littles, they don't have email. So sometimes we resort to print out, reminders. But, so I realize there is a concern that when we share an overdue notice with families, on the one hand, yes, it's a total violation of our student privacy. On the other hand, at the end of the day, the parents are, if there is going to be an effort to recoup the losses that are experienced, whether it is a school instrument, it is a school scientific calculator that the students have checked out. I mean, whatever the school property is, which has now gone home, ultimately at the end of the day, the parents are responsible for it. But I'll tell you what, this happens every year. I get a very upset email from a parent. What? My child turned that library book in. Why am I getting this notice now? And the first thing I do is say, did you look at the date on the notice? And because this is usually a phone call, I need to talk to the librarian right now. And it's like, did you look at the date on the notice? I said, it was accurate when it was printed. And of course, this is like weeks later, and they've just now gone through their child's home folder, right? And you're like, you just try and be as pleasant as possible, as level, just even toned. Take the tone out. There should be no tone. There is no tone. And you're just like, forgive me, but could you look at the date on the notice? And they're like, oh, it's from, March. And you're like, it's June. Yes, the book has been turned in. Thank you so much. And I apologize for any confusion. Again, apologize. I apologize for any confusion, but thank you so much. And oh my gosh, I'm feeling very triggered right now. It is, friends, we are recording on my first day of summer vacation. And I'm feeling very, very reminded of so many things that yes. we've had to face. And this is, friends, let's remind each other that regardless of the age of our students, getting those missing books to come back to the mothership, this is a situation, this is a challenge, this is an opportunity that so many of us face every single day. So I'm grateful for you to be here. Do you have any sort of overt sort of incentives when the kids bring their books back? I know some librarians will put out special bookmarks or stickers or do like one of those stick together mosaic. Have you ever had any success with something that has been especially, connects with the students?
Well, I think the natural incentive is that you get longer checkout time and you get first dibs on checkouts of new books, especially if we just did a book talk of like some new books that come out. Before students are allowed to go check out, I like to speak with them about their accounts because like Steve was saying, Amy was saying, like that conversation is really important. And the students who are not bringing books back for ulterior motive reasons, like they don't want to have to check out a new book or, they just want to hold on to it. Like we need to talk with them. And so they are itching to get up and go look at books with their friends. And so I'm like, oh, no, we need to have a chat. Let's just wait. So the incentive is you don't have to sit and talk with me during library time. Like they want to be up with their friends, socializing, looking at books, displays. But I think the biggest one, especially for the little kids, is that they have these book bags. And this is also something I never used before, but my outgoing librarian who retired, she would order from Demco, those like plastic iHeart library, just the different book bags for library books. And I didn't really discover them. I didn't find them until about midway through our school year. And I started giving each child like K1, even up to 2, putting their library books in there and saying, when you bring your library books back, make sure they stay in this bag. And our library book return for the little kids was even better than before, even with teachers being really on top of it. And then the kids who, wouldn't bring their books back and they wouldn't have their bag, I'd say, well, go pick out a paperback. And they'd be like, but I want a bag. And I'd say, well, you didn't bring it back, but you can carry yours. And then of course, even from using them mid-year until the end of the year, they were pretty beat up. And so I've been looking for more sustainable ways. And I found in a library magazine out from San Francisco Public Libraries, they had a newsletter out, and I found a workshop program where they're taking old T-shirts and turning them into book bags. And so that's what I really want to do this fall when we go back, is for all the grades. And, everyone has T-shirts that they don't want or need. And just as long as they can be big enough, I want to even have our bigger students make them for the younger students. I think that would be really cool. So yes, I think that having, your own library bag is a big incentive.
Oh, I love that.
And not having to talk with me about where are your books during library times. They want to be, with their friends looking at their own checkout books. So
yeah. How about you, Steve? I know that this is a new stint, you being in this job, and I know that it's a work in progress, but have you found anything that incentivizes or gets your students on board to be able to check out?
So because they can't really wander to the library and just grab stuff, they have to go online and place holds for stuff. So I've got kids who've got a hold list, but you can only get your holds if you've brought back the stuff that's out. So they've got that sort of built-in incentive, especially for the kids who are like, they'll read 3 books in 3 days, and then they want the next 3 of the series or whatever it is. So it's been working out. That's been working out really well so far. And I'm hoping next year that we can incorporate some other ideas too. But so far, that's been the big, like, I know that I can't go forward until I get this taken care of. So.
Yeah, we had that policy with series books that if you were checking out a series, you could only check out 1 at a time, because if you checked out 3 books and it was books 1, 2, and 3, nope. This is you're going to, series books was 1 at a time. And I didn't like to be the one to say, no, but you can check out 3 books. But when it comes to a series, it's 1 book at a time, because you're not going to start this book until you finish that book. I know for me, especially because we don't oftentimes get brand new books, and then more importantly, are they ready to circulate? But boy, when I had some brand new books and they were ready to circulate, I looked at all the checkouts that were coming up in the next 2 days, and I emailed those teachers and I just said, would you let your kids know the brand new books are ready? And to please say, you know what, you're going to want to bring those books back, because Mrs. Herman said the new books are ready to be checked out and you are going to get dibs. And I was so grateful to know that the word dibs is still being used.
Well, that's another thing I love about Accessit, not to fanboy about it more, but the kids they have a place where they can put in my interests, and any interest they put in, when we get new materials that match something they've put in, it emails them automatically, hey, these new books just came in that might match some of your interests. So that's adding that other layer of, oh no, I've already got stuff out, but this new thing came in that I really want. So it's, again, that sort of extra little bit of student interaction. This, I'm telling you, Accessit has changed the way our library functions. It is awesome.
Well, things that I'm hearing repeatedly: student accountability, student agency, making the students an active part of this process,
yes, rather
than passive. You know, as much as the students can feel like this is in their power to remedy, I think that is the key. And it doesn't matter how old those kids are. It doesn't matter how young they are. They have to learn this responsibility, but also that the reward is being able to check out. And that is something that we should always emphasize.
And it makes me chuckle, Amy, but every time I talk to a student, I say, well, okay, these books have been missing for a few weeks. Where have you looked for them? And they just look at me like, you mean I'm not just supposed to stumble upon them and bring them back? And I said, well, where have you been actively looking? Like, did you look under, furniture in, car, here, have you been anywhere? Did you go to someone's house? They're like, man, she's asking a lot of questions. And they said, well, can't we just pay for it? And I said, I'd rather have the book back, please. And so then they're just like, oh, okay. Or, my mom didn't put it in my bag. And I said, well, help your mom. Where did she look? I don't know. I said, well, you go home and you look for places. And it helps a lot just to let them know that it's in their power.
Well, and the other side of that, too, is when I've had to send emails home to parents saying, hey, it seems like your kid has lost this book. Here's what the replacement cost is going to be. I would say 9 out of 10 of those, all the next day, the book is there. So having that little bit of parent pressure sometimes can make the difference. But mostly the kids have been really good at self-monitoring and taking care of their own stuff. So that's been great.
I once tried a little half sheet, was like, have you checked your? And these were for kids who were capable, third grade up, they could read and feel confident. In little check boxes, have you checked your room? Have you checked the kitchen? Have you checked the car? Have you checked and having them do that little check, and they wrote down the name of the book that they were missing. And, I tried that, but really only after they had been missing it for quite a while, trying to say, hey, let's think of all the places. And oftentimes our kids have more than one home. And if you have more than one house and library day happens to be on the day and you're not at that house, and you have to be very sensitive to the students and their living situations, because all too often this is something that is completely out of their control. And I definitely try to recognize that. So Steve and Fallon, before I let you go, I think something we need to keep, we got to stay grounded in this conversation. We have to remember that, for any of us who've tried to track down lost books, we eventually come to the realization that our time is far more valuable than the dollar value of any missing book. And I'm sorry I didn't have that realization sooner. And I think a lot of public libraries, when they have those sort of amnesty days, they sort of come to that realization, that at the end of the day, a lost book is a lost book, but our time is far more valuable being spent elsewhere. I'm sorry I didn't have that realization sooner, but Fallon, could you speak to this a little bit and how it has shaped your practice?
Definitely. Well, I was very spoiled when I had library assistants because that was their main task. And so now when I do not have that, I've really had to be really stringent about, okay, this is the amount of time I'm putting on this task, but I have all of these other, administrative tasks that I need to do aside from, pulling books for teachers or, lesson planning. And so, there's only so much time in the day. And so I just tell myself, I really do push it. It is not my primary everyday priority. So I just keep that at the front of my mind. And I say, when I can work on it, I do. And like Steve, you were saying, just having those automated messages, like, okay, there's a routine in place. I have students pull up their accounts, when they come in, my older students, I talk to them about it when they're checking out. I'm like, but other than that, there is only so much that I am able to do right now because we have so many other things that are on our plate. Those plates that we're spinning from the start of the year. Even now, I'm thinking about, okay, got to get bracelets, got to get this, for when school is back in session. That, but my first year of being a librarian, I thought, oh, if I don't get these books back, I'm failing. And that's okay that we think that as a baby librarian, but, I just know it's going to happen. It's okay. I had a really great library mentor who told me, oh, I never expect all the books to come back. If that happens, it's a magical day. So as long as you know that this will happen, do not get down on yourself. Because like Amy, you were saying, there's all these factors and we're doing the best we can. But at the end of the day, it's really working with the students and the families, and a lot of them don't have control over things that happen. So yeah, I just and also it's my least favorite part of the job. So going after missing books is easy to put on the back burner because I don't enjoy doing it. I mean, I do it, but I don't love it. I would much rather develop other book lists and
absolutely
go to trainings.
How about you, Steve? How do you talk yourself down from getting too worked up about lost books?
I'll tell you, when I first started, I say that like it's a million years ago and it was only 18 months. But personally, there's a lot of things that I'm just very laid back about. But one thing in my personal life that drives me nuts is when people mess with my books. I love books. And when my wife dog ears the page, we're not quite at divorce, but so when kids started, when books started disappearing and I realized they weren't coming back, the first couple of times it hit me kind of hard. And then I kind of said, you know what? They're not my books. They're their books. I bought them for them. And I've heard so many librarians say, would you rather have the book in the library or would you rather have a kid who needs that book having that book? And I have tried to really take that to heart and just say, if it's gone, it's gone. It's not the end of the world. Yes, I would like to have the book, but we can always order replacements. We can always, find some way to get around it. And I mean, right now there's a student that I know has a book out and I want it back so badly. They're a senior, but there's some stuff that I became aware of going on. And I don't think that book is coming back. And like at first I was a little bit like, oh, but they're a senior and I'm never going to see them, never going to see this kid, and the book's going to be gone. But then I was like, you know what? It's a book. It's a book. It's, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, So I've been definitely trying to keep that in mind and give the kids lots of grace and give myself lots of grace too, to be able to say, hey, it's okay. It happens.
We could have this conversation for 6 more hours. But Steve, what you said about that, you're not going to go, you're not going to see that student again. It reminded me when I was telling the students, well, what do you think happens when you don't bring these books back? I'm not going to come to your home. And they're like, you're not? Like they wanted me to go. And I'm like, no, I commute to work. No, I live in another city. Like I don't even live here. But, I think some of them would like us to be really invested and like want to have that. Well, come and help me. And I'm like, well, I cannot. I have all these other things.
Be careful what you wish for. I made house calls during the pandemic. Seriously, during the pandemic. And I had kids who couldn't come to the curbside. We were curbside checkout, and I had kids who had COVID and they couldn't. And their parents are like, we're going to miss you. I'm so sorry, because I wanted to come do curbside checkout. And I said, well, just, I'll bring books to you and just tell me what you're at. I actually just said, I'll deliver you a bag of books. No problem. And you can drop them off at curbside next week. And no big deal. And it didn't happen often, but it was, again, it's sort of those silver linings of the pandemic where I was like, I'm making house calls. I'm a librarian and I'm making house calls and I matter. Fallon, Steve, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I know listeners everywhere are like, oh, I feel seen. This is a problem we could be talking about again and again and again. And friends, I am so grateful that you joined us for this conversation today. Fallon, you and I cross paths online all the time. Tell us how listeners can follow you on social media.
Sure. So I am on Twitter at @Farokhi, and I'm on Instagram at The Story Spectator, which is our school library main social media account for our school library. But I also do things there in the summer too. So Twitter and Instagram are my biggest ones. I'm on Facebook, but not as a librarian, as a private citizen. But I'm in a lot of Facebook librarian groups.
Exactly.
And so you might see me on there as Fallon Farokhi. And so you'll know that I'm in there.
All right. How about you, Steve? I know if listeners don't already have you in their virtual PLN, they should be adding you. Where can we find you on social media?
I spend most of my social media time in Twitter. I've been trying to move a little bit more into Instagram, but it's not my main area. And my handle on all the socials is at Dr. T Loves Books. And for School Library and Learning Network, if you want to check that out, we've got a Twitter feed for that as well. It's School LIB LN. So School Lib LN will get you that Twitter feed, and you can check out the website and all that good stuff. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you.
Fantastic, friends. Thank you so much, and have a spectacular summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider sharing some fan mail with Steve and Fallon, because I know they'd love to hear from you and how much you enjoyed their episode. One last friendly reminder, friends, use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more, and schedule your first Literati Book Fair before July 31st for this fall 2023 and receive a $500 Titlewave gift card. As always, there are links in the show notes. The topic of our next episode will be ALA 23 and my conversation with those I met while attending the conference. I hope you will tune in.